My wife cheated on me with her best friend's brother, then stole $200, $0 from our joint account to hide her affair. Now she's suing me for half the house, and I just found out she's been secretly working with a shady lawyer to eliminate my inheritance rights. I never thought I'd be the guy standing here, stunned and betrayed, telling a story like this. But life has a way of punching you in the gut when you least expect it. The most unexpected moment came when I found out my wife, Emily, was cheating on me with her best friend's brother, Jake. Yeah, you heard that right. The guy who used to be just some guy I saw at family cookouts turned out to be the guy she was sneaking around with behind my back. And if that wasn't enough, she stole $200, $0 from our joint account to hide her affair. I mean, who even does that? It's like some twisted soap opera, but this was real life, and it hit me harder than I ever thought possible. We'd been married for about 10 years, and honestly, I thought things were pretty good. Sure, every marriage has its ups and downs, but I never suspected Emily was capable of something this messy. At first, I noticed little things. She was more secretive with her phone, always kept it close, even during dinner. She'd get defensive if I asked about her day or who she was texting. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just stressed about work or something. But then I started noticing money was disappearing from our accounts. Small amounts at first, then suddenly big chunks, like $20, $0 here, $50, $0 there. I remember sitting at the computer one night, looking at the bank statement, and my stomach dropped. The money was gone, and there was no explanation that made sense. It wasn't until I caught her in a lie that everything blew up. I had gone to her phone to look for a message she'd told me about, and I saw a text thread with Jake. I knew Jake. It was that guy from her friend Lisa's family. They'd always been close, but I never imagined anything more than a casual friendship. But what I saw on her phone was different. There were explicit messages, planning meetings, and even photos. I saw her saying things like, wait to see you tonight, and don't forget to bring the condoms. My heart stopped. I couldn't believe it. My wife, the woman I loved, was screwing her best friend's brother. That's some next-level betrayal. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I kept quiet, trying to process what I'd seen. I started digging into her phone, her emails, her bank accounts, anything I could find. That's when I discovered she'd stolen the $200, $0. It was hidden in some offshore account, transferred from our joint account over the past few months. She'd been planning this, I think, to cover her tracks, to make sure I wouldn't find out. And she'd been working with a shady lawyer named Carter, who she'd secretly been talking to for months. I found out she was trying to cut me out of the inheritance I was supposed to get when my parents passed away. She's been scheming behind my back, lying through her teeth, and I was just sitting here, blindsided, wondering how I'd been so blind. When I finally confronted her, it was a scene. I told her I knew everything, the affair, the money, the lawyer. She went full bitch mode, denying everything, spinning stories about how I was paranoid, jealous, and imagining things. She had the nerve to cry and say I was overreacting, that she loved me but needed some excitement because our sex life had been boring lately. She said she was just testing boundaries, that Jake was just a friend, and that I was overreacting because I was insecure. But I knew better. I saw the evidence, and I could feel the betrayal stabbing me in the chest. How could she lie so easily? How could she betray me after all these years? The emotional fallout was brutal. I went from feeling numb to pure rage. I was furious at her for destroying everything we built, for lying, for stealing, for cheating. I felt humiliated, like I'd been played for a fool. But underneath all that was this deep sadness, how someone I trusted so much could turn into this manipulative, selfish person. I kept asking myself what I did wrong, how I missed all the signs. It was a whirlwind of emotions, and honestly, I didn't know how to handle it. I just knew I couldn't stay in that house, look at her, and pretend everything was okay. I needed to think, to plan, to figure out what to do next. And that's when I realized I couldn't trust her anymore. The woman I thought I knew was gone. She'd become this scheming, lying, money-stealing cheat who dragged me into her mess. I looked at the house, our life savings, my inheritance, everything I'd worked for, and wondered how it all could be so easily torn apart. but I also knew I had to take control. I couldn't let her keep pulling the strings. The betrayal was too deep and I was done being the victim. It was time to fight back to get my life back. I just didn't know how messy it was about to get. After I confronted Emily that night, everything spiraled even further out of control. She sat there, her eyes wide with that fake innocence she always had when she knew she was lying. She kept insisting she was innocent, that I was just paranoid, that she loved me but needed some adventure, whatever that meant. She spun stories about how I was overreacting, how she'd never cheat on me, and that I was just jealous because I didn't understand her. It made me sick to hear her lie so effortlessly, like she was some victim in her own twisted game. I'd been with her for over a decade, and I'd never seen her like this, cold, manipulative, completely devoid of remorse. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I kept staring at the bank statements, trying to understand how she managed to siphon off $200, $0 without me noticing sooner. That's when I realized she'd been working with a shady lawyer named Carter. I found out she'd been secretly meeting with him for months, drafting some kind of legal scheme to cut me out of our inheritance. She wanted the house, the savings, everything. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach all over again. She was planning to leave me with nothing, just like that. And I had no idea how deep her lies went until I started digging into Carter's shady reputation. I decided I needed to do something. I hired my own lawyer, one I found through a friend who knew some reputable folks, and we started building a case. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to know how far she was willing to go to keep her secrets hidden. I installed a few discreet surveillance cameras around the house, not for invasion of privacy but to catch her in the act if she tried to do something else. I also hired a private investigator to follow her, just in case she was planning to run or hide the money even more. I was furious. How could she betray me like this? We had a life, a future, and she was throwing it all away for some affair and a quick cash grab. Meanwhile, Emily kept lying, spinning stories, and playing the victim. She told her friends she was just exploring her feelings, that Jake was just a bad influence, and that I was controlling. She painted herself as the victim, poor Emily, the betrayed wife, while I was the villain. That made me even angrier. How could she be so manipulative? She knew exactly what she was doing. She'd been working with Carter, planning to take everything I had. I found out she'd even been secretly working with this lawyer behind my back to eliminate my inheritance rights. I couldn't believe how deep her deception went. One night, I caught her sneaking into her phone again. She'd been deleting messages, hiding her plans, but I managed to recover some of her texts with Carter. They discussed transferring assets, creating fake documents, even forging signatures. I felt a cold rage rise up inside me. This wasn't just infidelity. This was betrayal on a scale I'd never imagined. She was actively trying to wipe me out, to steal my future, all while pretending everything was fine. The betrayal cut so deep I could hardly breathe. I realized I'd been living in a house built on lies, and now I was trying to figure out how to tear down that house without losing everything I had left. The emotional toll was immense. I felt humiliated, angry, and betrayed all at once. I kept asking myself how I could have missed the signs, how I didn't see the cracks in our marriage sooner. But mostly I felt heartbreak, because I still loved her, even after everything. It was a sick, twisted love that was now poisoned by her lies. I wondered if I'd ever be able to trust anyone again, or if I'd just be left with the scars of this betrayal. I'd always been a cautious guy. But Emily's deception was like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me. I started to think about what my next move should be, whether I should fight to save what's left or just cut my losses and walk away. All I knew for sure was that I wasn't going down without a fight. The more I uncovered, the more I realized just how deep Emily's web of lies went. It wasn't just about the affair and stealing money. She'd been secretly working with Carter, the shady lawyer, to manipulate the legal system and wipe me out of any claim I had to our assets. I found drafts of fake contracts, forged signatures, and even emails where Carter discussed strategies to eliminate my inheritance rights. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind for so long. She'd been planning this entire betrayal for months behind my back, and I was just now catching up. I knew I had to act fast. I met with my new lawyer, a sharp guy named David who specialized in family law and financial fraud. We went over everything: her secret meetings with Carter, the offshore accounts, the forged documents. It was a mess, but I had enough evidence now to fight back. But even as I prepared my legal case, I couldn't shake the feeling of being completely violated. It was like everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. Every memory with Emily, every moment of trust, turned out to be just part of her long con. One thing I couldn't ignore was the money. That $200, $0 she stole, it wasn't just some random act of greed. It was part of her plan to cover her tracks, to ensure she had enough cash to run if she needed to. I found out she'd been funneling some of it into secret accounts, probably to pay Jake or to fund her legal schemes with Carter. It made me furious, how she used our joint savings as her personal piggy bank, all while pretending to be the loving wife. I started to realize that she'd been lying about everything, even the little things. She'd always been bitchy when questioned, dismissive, and quick to turn the tables on me. Now I saw that her bitchiness was just her way of masking her guilt. I also learned that she'd been secretly working with Jake too. I found texts where they discussed meeting up, sneaking around, and even plans to leave the country if things got too hot. That was the moment I knew I had to do something drastic. I couldn't let her just walk away with everything: my house, my inheritance, my future. I made up my mind to confront her one last time, but this time I'd be ready. I started documenting everything, gathering proof of her illegal dealings, and preparing for a fight that I knew would get nasty. The emotional impact was crushing. I felt betrayed, angry, and helpless all at once. I'd poured my heart into that marriage, into building a life with her, and she'd thrown it all away for some affair and a quick buck. I kept asking myself if I'd missed the signs, if I'd been blind to how manipulative she'd become. But deep down, I knew I wasn't the only victim here. Emily had been planning this from the start, and I was just her latest target. Still, I couldn't let her get away with it. I had to stand up for what was right, for what little dignity I had left. One night, I caught her trying to move more money out of our accounts. She was on her laptop, typing away, looking panicked when I walked into the room. I saw the telltale signs of her trying to cover her tracks, deleting files, closing windows fast. That was the last straw. I snapped a few screenshots, saved all the evidence, and told her that I knew everything. Her face twisted into that bitchy sneer she always used when she was cornered. She told me I was crazy, that I was paranoid, that I was ruining everything. But I knew the truth now. She'd been lying to my face for months, maybe years, and I was done being the fool. It was clear that her plan was to leave me with nothing. She wanted the house, the money, the inheritance, all of it. And she'd been working with Carter to make sure that happened. I felt a mix of rage and despair, knowing I'd been played for a fool, but also realizing I had to do something to stop her. I couldn't just let her walk away with my future. I decided I'd fight her legally, expose her lies, and take back what was mine. The betrayal was so raw, so intense, I wondered if I'd ever be able to trust anyone again. But I knew I had no choice. I had to stand my ground and face whatever was coming. The next few weeks turned into a nightmare. I threw myself into legal battles, trying to piece together everything Emily and Carter had been up to. I hired forensic accountants to trace the offshore accounts, and they found more than I expected: multiple transfers, some labeled as consulting fees, others as loans, but all pointing back to Emily's secret stash. It was clear she'd been planning to disappear with the money for months, maybe even years. Every new discovery made my blood boil. How could she do this to me, to everything we built? I started to see her for what she really was: a manipulative, selfish bitch who'd lie, cheat, and steal to get what she wanted. Meanwhile, Emily kept up her act of innocence. She'd call me paranoid, accuse me of trying to ruin her, and cry about how I was controlling her life. Her words felt like poison, but I refused to be manipulated anymore. She'd been lying so much that I could tell what was real anymore. I knew I had to get ahead of her legal schemes, so I pushed my lawyer to file for an emergency injunction to freeze her assets and prevent her from transferring anything else. The court granted it, but I knew it was only a temporary fix. Emily was smart. She'd been working with Carter to find loopholes, and I had a feeling this wasn't over yet. One of the most shocking moments came when I found out she'd been secretly working with Jake, her best friend's brother, the same guy she'd cheated with. I discovered a series of texts where they discussed their plans to leave the country if things got too hot. She'd even made arrangements to get him a fake passport and a plane ticket. I couldn't believe how far she was willing to go, how much she was willing to risk just to keep her lies hidden. It was like watching a bad crime movie unfold in real life. All I could think about was the betrayal, the woman I loved, now reduced to a con artist and a liar. The emotional toll was brutal. I felt like I was losing my mind some days. How could she have done this? How did I miss all the signs? I've been so blinded by love and trust that I didn't see the betrayal coming. Now I was left with a broken marriage, a mountain of lies, and a future that felt uncertain. I was angry at her, furious at myself for trusting her so blindly, and scared of what was coming next. The thought of losing everything, my house, my inheritance, even my dignity, haunted me. But I also knew I couldn't let her get away with it. I had to fight for what was rightfully mine, even if it meant tearing apart everything I'd worked for. As I gathered more evidence, I started to realize how calculated her moves had been. She lied about everything, about her meetings with Carter, her dealings with Jake, even her intentions for the house. She'd been secretly working behind my back, plotting her escape and trying to erase me from her life. I felt a strange mixture of heartbreak and anger. How could someone I'd trusted for so long become this cold, manipulative person? I kept replaying all our memories, wondering where I went wrong. But deep down, I knew I couldn't fix this. She crossed a line I never thought she would. The betrayal was too big, and now I was just trying to hold on to whatever was left of my life. The worst part was realizing she'd been lying to my face all along. She convinced her friends that she was the victim, that I was the jealous husband trying to control her. Meanwhile, she was sneaking around, scheming with Carter and stealing from us. I started to see that her bitchy attitude, her quick temper, and her constant dismissiveness were just her defenses, covering up her guilt and shame. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind. But I also knew that I couldn't let her get away with it. I had to stand up, fight back, and protect what's mine. That was the only way I could see to salvage some sense of justice after everything she'd done. I was exhausted, angry, but determined. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it head-on. The legal battles dragged on, and every day felt like a new punch in the gut. Emily's lawyer, Carter, was a snake, slick, manipulative, and clearly experienced at bending the law to his advantage. I knew I was fighting not just Emily, but an entire web of lies and schemes that they'd spun over months. I spent countless nights poring over documents, emails, and bank statements, trying to make sense of her twisted plans. The offshore accounts, the forged signatures, the fake legal documents, they all painted a picture of someone willing to do anything to keep her secrets hidden and her money safe. I couldn't believe I'd been married to someone so capable of betrayal. One of the most infuriating revelations was her work with Jake, her best friend's brother. I found texts where they discussed how she was planning to leave the country, how Jake was getting a fake passport, and how she was going to disappear with the money she'd stolen. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about infidelity or greed. It was about her outright trying to destroy my future. I pictured her, cold and calculating, plotting her escape while I was left to pick up the pieces. I'd never felt so betrayed, so disgusted. It was like she'd become a different person, someone who only cared about herself and her own selfish needs. I decided to play hardball. I filed a motion for a temporary restraining order to freeze all her assets and prevent her from transferring anything else. The court granted it, but I knew this was just the beginning. Emily was resourceful, and I had a sinking feeling she'd find a way to loophole her way out of it. I also hired a private investigator to follow her around, just to see if she was planning to run or transfer more money. The pie caught her meeting with Jake in a seedy hotel, exchanging what looked like more cash and documents. That was the last straw. I knew I had to get ahead of her or she'd slip away with everything. Meanwhile, Emily kept up her act of innocence, crying crocodile tears about how she was the victim, how I was paranoid and controlling. She told her friends I was crazy, that I didn't understand her need for excitement. It made me want to scream. I saw right through her. She was lying, scheming, and trying to manipulate everyone around her. I couldn't believe how good she was at spinning her web of lies, but I also knew that her lies were unraveling fast. Every new piece of evidence I uncovered made her look more guilty. The emotional toll was overwhelming. I felt like I was losing my mind some days. How could she do this? How could she betray me so completely after all these years? I kept asking myself if I'd missed the signs, if I'd been blind to her true nature. But the truth was, she'd been planning this from the start. Every bitchy comment, every dismissive shrug, every lie, all part of her act to hide her true intentions. I felt humiliated, angry, and heartbroken. I'd loved her, and now I saw her for what she really was, a manipulative, selfish bitch who'd do anything for money and sex. I knew I had to keep fighting, to protect what little was left of my dignity and my future. One night, I caught her trying to move more money out of the offshore accounts. She was frantically deleting files, trying to cover her tracks. I snapped some screenshots and confronted her directly. Her face twisted into her usual sneer, the one she always used when she was caught. She told me I was crazy, that I was trying to control her, that she deserved happiness. But I didn't believe her anymore. I saw her for what she was, a liar, a thief, a manipulator. I realized I couldn't trust her even for a second. All the years I'd given her, all the love I'd shown, she'd used it against me. I knew I had to make a choice, keep fighting or cut my losses and walk away. I decided I'd fight, not just for the house or the money, but for my dignity. I couldn't let her win this, couldn't let her walk away with everything I'd worked for. The betrayal was too deep, the lies too many. I'd come too far to give up now. I started preparing for the final legal showdown, gathering every piece of evidence, lining up witnesses, and planning my next move. I knew this wasn't over yet. Emily had one last trick up her sleeve, but I was ready. I'd be damned if I let her destroy my future without a fight. The final showdown came sooner than I expected. Emily had been working tirelessly behind the scenes, trying to manipulate the legal system and clear her path to walk away with everything. Our house, our savings, my inheritance. But I had my evidence and I had the law on my side. The court date was set, and I knew I had to be ready to lay everything bare. I spent days reviewing every document, every email, every shady deal she and Carter had cooked up. I knew this was the moment I had to stand my ground, to finally expose her for the con artist she'd become. The courtroom was tense. Emily sat there, her bitchy smirk hiding her nerves, but I could see the flicker of panic in her eyes. Carter looked confident, slick as ever, but I wasn't about to let them win. I presented my case, how she'd secretly stolen $200, $0, transferred assets offshore, forged documents, and plotted with Jake to disappear. I played the recordings of her conversations with Carter, showed the bank statements, the fake passports, the emails. I watched her face drain of color as the evidence piled against her. The judge listened carefully, and I could tell he was unimpressed with her lies. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she tried her usual tactic, crying, claiming I was mentally unstable, that she loved me and never cheated. But her words sounded hollow, rehearsed. I stood up and looked her straight in the eye, telling the court about her betrayal, her greed, her manipulation. I explained how she'd been working with Carter to wipe me out, how she'd been planning to leave me with nothing. I saw her desperately trying to spin her web of lies, but it was too late. The evidence was damning. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. He ordered her to return the stolen money, freeze her assets, and pay restitution for the fraud. He also granted me full control of the house and my inheritance rights. Emily's face crumpled, and she spat out accusations about how I was ruining her life, but the court wasn't buying it. Justice, in this case, felt like a long overdue relief. I finally felt like I was regaining some control, some dignity. After the court proceedings, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. I had fought hard and I'd won, at least legally, but the emotional scars ran deep. I realized I'd been lucky to escape with what I had left, but I also knew I'd never forget what I'd gone through. I learned that trust is fragile and that sometimes the person you love the most can turn out to be your biggest enemy. I also learned the importance of vigilance, never ignoring the small signs, always protecting yourself, and never settling for lies. Now, I'm rebuilding my life. I sold the house, cut ties with Emily and Carter, and started focusing on myself. I've learned to be more cautious, more guarded, but also more aware of what real betrayal looks like. I still feel anger, heartbreak, and disappointment, but I also feel a strange sense of empowerment. I survived something I thought I never would, and I came out the other side stronger. If there's one thing I want others to take from this, it's that no matter how much you love someone, you have to protect yourself. Trust is earned, not given blindly. And when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. Because sometimes the betrayal comes from the person you least expect.